Despite chaos in London, writer Samson Young heads there, hoping for inspiration. He arrives at an apartment with his cab driver, Keith. Due to the city's turmoil, Samson is the only respondent to a swap offer from renowned author Mark Asprey. In the luxurious flat, Samson listens to Asprey's welcoming voicemail, encouraging him to explore and find inspiration. Ignoring Asprey's novel on the desk, Samson explores an unrenovated room, intending to draw inspiration from the crisis. The swap aims to inspire both writers. Asprey gains insight into Samson's challenging living conditions in Hell's Gate. Samson plans to model his new protagonist after his own struggles. Later, Keith takes Samson to the Black Cross pub, where they meet patrons, including Guy Clinch, related to royalty. A sudden noise startles Keith, who fears loan sharks are after him. Despite his fear, he claims defiance against the lenders, explaining his financial woes and debts, especially with Chick Purchase, with whom he has a history. Chick Purchase lent him money with a threat of severe consequences if he fails to repay. Now Keith is in trouble with 3 dangerous creditors. Suddenly, a stunning woman dressed in black named Nicola 6 enters, captivating everyone's attention. She asks for cigarettes, but when the bar doesn't have her brand, Keith steps up and sends a kid to fetch them for her. Guy also tries to catch her eye, but appears more reserved compared to Keith's bold advances. Meanwhile, Samson observes from a distance, catching Nicola's interest in return. Nicola finally gets her cigarettes, but after lighting one, she starts feeling woozy. When she regains her senses, she rushes to leave, casting a glance at Samson as she exits. Despite this, Keith is convinced she's interested in him and follows her, with Guy and Samson trailing behind. Samson ponders the stark differences between Keith and Guy, realizing they both inspire his characters. He acknowledges Nicola's role in kickstarting his story. To Samson's surprise, he learns that Nicola lives in the same building as Asprey. The next day, Samson struggles with writer's block despite taking his prescribed medication. Hearing noises from above, he investigates and spies on Nicola through cracks in the ceiling as she discards items in her apartment. He follows her outside as she throws things into the bin. As Nicola walks away, Samson inspects the items she left behind and discovers her journal, revealing her predictions about her loved ones' deaths. Unaware of her presence, Samson reads on as Nicola watches from afar. According to her journal, Nicola predicts her own demise on her 30th birthday, which falls on Guy Fawkes Day. Her final entry mentions meeting her killer at the Black Cross pub the day before. Intrigued, Samson seeks out Nicola later that day. He shares his belief in her premonitions and wonders about her future killer. Nicola, sensing that he's read her journal, admits she's unsure which man will be her murderer. Samson hesitantly admits his dream of writing a murder mystery and asks for permission to base the story on her death, envisioning it as his masterpiece. Without hesitation, Nicola agrees. Fueled by inspiration, Samson immediately begins work. He arranges Nicola's journal on an evidence board in the unfinished room and sets up a sound system to listen in on her apartment. The next day, the struggling writer daydreams of Asprey's success until Keith's visit interrupts him. Nicola mistakes Keith for a handyman, hiring him to fix her circuit breaker. However, Keith, aspiring to compete in darts, curses his luck after injuring his hand inebriatedly. Nicola tends to his wound, probing into his personal life until he confesses he's married with a daughter. Puzzled by Nicola's request for Guy to call her, Keith delivers the message. Guy becomes intrigued but shifts focus when his wife, Hope, enters. Afterward, Guy asks Keith to babysit while he contacts Nicola. Samson ponders Keith's potential as Nicola's future killer. Despite Keith's rough demeanor, Nicola remains uncertain, seeking Samson's help to determine his debt. The woman promptly accepts Guy's invitation. Samson wonders if she plans to pit the two men against each other for her own demise. Nicola adopts a conservative appearance for her date with Guy the next day. During lunch, Nicola shares her plight with Guy, seeking help to reunite her friend Enola with her son. Charmed, Guy readily agrees. He arranges for his driver to take Nicola home, but she's unsettled when she notices the car matches her premonition. Both Nicola and Samson speculate if Guy could be her potential killer. Suspecting Guy, Samson investigates further. He discovers Guy's affluent background and observes his apparent dissatisfaction despite his privileged life. The writer meets Keith's family, his wife, Kath, and daughter, Kim. Keith, indifferent to his wife, shows affection to his daughter while teaching Samson darts. Their lesson ends abruptly when Chick arrives, increasing Keith's anxiety by reminding him of his debts. Meanwhile, Samson sends his novel's first chapters to his publisher, eager for the story's success. Despite his growing attachment to his muse, he reminds himself it's solely for his novel's sake. Later, Keith wins a darts tournament at the pub, attended by Nicola. Angered by her departure with Guy, Keith confronts them. Nicola kisses Guy, prompting Samson's reflection on her journal entries about love, though she never reciprocated those feelings. Keith visits Nicola, who offers to settle his debt. She seduces him to assert control before Guy arrives. Devastated by Guy's failure to locate Enola, Nicola tearfully confides in him about Enola's captivity. Determined to rescue her, Nicola asks for Guy's help, and he agrees. The next day, Guy witnesses Nicola meeting her supposed contact, unaware of the deception. Nicola manipulates the situation to convince Guy she needs $60,000 for Enola's release. Despite Samson's warning, Nicola continues, believing her fate is sealed. Nicola tries to involve Samson further, but he refuses to be another pawn. She deliberately arrives late to her date with Keith. Frustrating him, Samson embellishes her story in hopes of impressing his publisher, though he eventually admits to Nicola that her story may be his best work yet. Having read Samson's previous novel, Nicola criticizes his tendency to create one-dimensional characters. She also reveals her knowledge of the author's terminal illness, challenging him on who will meet their demise first. However, Samson counters, asserting that it will be her since he still needs to write her murder. As he returns home that evening, Samson tries to convince himself that his feelings for Nicola are not love, but rather a connection through their shared fate. He organizes the medicines he has, realizing they will only last until the day before Nicola's predicted death. He has reserved a different capsule to ease his own end on that day. Samson receives another voicemail from Asprey, who attempts to compliment his previous novel by calling him brave for writing an autobiography of his failures. This only serves to infuriate Samson further. Meanwhile, Nicola calls Guy, feigning guilt over using his influence and money, leading to her decision to end their relationship. This leaves Guy angry and heartbroken, exactly as Nicola planned. Shortly after the call, Keith barges into Nicola's apartment, demanding the money she promised him. She assures him she will get it and instructs him to inform Guy that she is selling her belongings urgently. The next day, Keith visits Guy, pretending to be concerned for Nicola's well-being. Meanwhile, Nicola relaxes with Samson, who expresses concern over not yet fully understanding his muse. Nicola accuses Samson of reading her diaries, but he defends himself, stating they merely reflect others' perceptions of her, not her true self. He confesses he still doesn't fully understand her. Tearfully, Nicola implores him to look into her eyes, but their moment is cut short by an interruption. Nicola quickly adopts a damsel in distress guise when Guy arrives. Samson watches as Guy insists on giving her money to purportedly rescue her friend Enola from warlords. Samson empathizes with Guy, knowing from Nicola's journal that Enola is a fictional character. 2 days before Guy Fawkes Day, Samson's publisher rejects his book, citing Nicola as one-dimensional. Hurt, Samson retreats to the rooftop, where Nicola seduces him. Despite his initial resistance, he succumbs to her advances. Afterward, Nicola asks for Samson's honest opinion. He describes her as a haunting dream he fears losing upon waking. Nicola wonders why she's the only one providing solace, and Samson explains others refuse to accept life's inevitability. The next day, a social worker visits Keith's home, suggesting their daughter might be taken away due to their poor living conditions. Keith is shocked to find Nicola posing as the social worker. Furious, he confronts her outside their apartment, but she calmly suggests he visit her later that evening. As Samson writes, he realizes Nicola's actions are part of her plan to control her own death. When Keith confronts her, she gives him the money Guy provided, enough to settle his debts. Keith leaves in high spirits, but is abducted by Chick's gang. Desperate, Keith offers them money from his bag, which impresses Chick. However, drugs given to Keith cause hallucinations of torture. The following day, Keith competes in his dream televised darts tournament and wins. To celebrate, Nicola fulfills Keith's fantasy. Meanwhile, Guy learns at a pub that Nicola has been paying Keith for pleasure, realizing he was deceived by her. Samson wakes to a voicemail from Asprey, who compares him to a character cut from his novel. Intrigued, Samson explores the novel Asprey left, finding photos of Nicola and Asprey inside, revealing her attempts to manipulate yet another author. Shortly after, Guy confronts Nicola in her apartment. Despite her damsel act, Keith's arrival interrupts. Guy questions Nicola's relationship with Keith, and she lies, claiming to teach him to read. Unconvinced, Guy probes further, leading to a confession of love from both. Interrupting their intimacy, Nicola urges Guy to confess to his wife. Guilt-ridden, Guy agrees. Meanwhile, Samson listens, realizing Nicola's manipulation. The next morning, on Nicola's birthday, Samson confronts her about Asprey. Nicola admits Asprey removed her from his story due to fear, revealing her manipulative nature. Amidst turmoil, Guy confesses to his wife, causing family upheaval. Despite this, he remains committed to Nicola until she sends him a book, revealing her deceit. Meanwhile, Keith prepares for a tournament, joined by Samson and Nicola. However, Nicola's flirtation distracts Keith during the game. Guy arrives, enraged by Nicola's behavior with Chick. Despite his efforts, he's thwarted by both men. Distraught, Keith loses his match. Afterwards, Samson waits for Nicola's predicted fate. Guy waits in his car while Keith arrives with a wrench. They argue over Nicola, but Guy restrains himself, opting to leave. Samson helps the injured Keith into a cab, then joins Guy, advising against revenge. Driven to the brink by Nicola's manipulation, Guy can't bring himself to further harm for her. With a heavy heart, he exits the car, leaving Samson alone where Nicola's fate awaits. As Nicola arrives, Samson nervously watches, realizing everything unfolds as she foresaw. Nicola shows no surprise, confirming Samson's suspicion. Accepting their fates, Samson uses the wrench to end Nicola's life. Afterwards, Samson drags her body into Asprey's apartment, completing his final novel and taking medicine for a peaceful end. Placing the pages over Nicola's body, he leaves a note for Asprey, asking to dedicate earnings to Keith's daughter. Finally, he sits beside Nicola, ready to die alongside his masterpiece. Days later, Asprey discovers their bodies, retrieving Samson's novel with a smile. He publishes it under his name, claiming the story for which both sacrificed.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.